everyone's been very curious to know what I thought about District 9. In fact, I was curious to know what I was going to think about District 9. It was one of the few trailers I saw that got me legitimately fired up for any kind of movie this summer because, God knows Transformers and X-Men Origins Wolverine were major letdowns. In fact, I think this entire summer season has been a major letdown, the worst of which being Land of the Lost, which I found one of the most unfunniest, most disgusting, loathsome excuses for a Will Ferrell vehicle ever. But back to District 9. I had read a ton of reviews, trying to avoid spoilers as much as possible, and all of them were extremely glowing. I mean, I don't think I saw any of them under like an A, or whatever, like 5 stars. I don't think I saw anything under like a 4.5. And so I was really fired up. I was very optimistic going into this. In fact, I thought this was one of the most original ideas to come through Hollywood in a long time. Although, when I got to thinking about it, this plot is not dissimilar to Alien Nation, which is actually a very underrated sci-fi classic that if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check out, because tonally it's very similar. And to tell you the truth, I had a lot of problems with it. I'm going to backpedal a little bit, though, and I'm going to say a few things that are supportive of it. This is still, despite the problems I had with it, one of the most intelligent and highest quality movies you will see this summer. I mean good in terms of technically made. At a budget, I believe, of $30 million or so, this looks and is better than most of the ultra-budget titles that you've seen, like Transformers 2. All of these movies look bad in comparison, and I think that's really remarkable in the sense that that with so little money, now I know you had Peter Jackson's What If Workshop, and that probably saved a lot on money, but still, the fact that this movie looks as good as it does, and are as seamless as they are, like you really believe these creatures kind of exist. I mean, they don't, but you're really able to believe that they occupy space and matter, and they have weight, and their punches, they have impact to them. And I think that's really remarkable that you sympathize and empathize with these creatures, where with the Autobots, you're clearly looking at CG constructs, and at no point are you ever able to suspend that disbelief that you're really just looking at a computer pixel in a video game. And I still thought that, there's not a bad message here. This is still a very sharp, very intelligent sci-fi movie that has a lot to offer. In terms of for new people who are fresh to sci-fi, this is a very strong wake-up call. It's a sci-fi movie that has a very good story and a very clear message, and that's what sci-fi used to be about, in a way. But that being said, here are the problems I had with this movie, and I'm going to diffuse a few arguments right now by saying I know that when you respond to these complaints that I have, you're going to say that I just really didn't get it, or the things I'm pointing out are exactly the point of the film. So I'm going to start with probably the biggest problem I had just from reading the premise was the fact that, I'm going to avoid spoilers as much as possible, things that you would never have known from the movie, just you saw the trailers. But still, you should probably watch the movie before this. Don't let me sway you. This is more a discussion for what we all thought of it. I thought that really the parallels to real life racism in terms of South African apartheid, the sense that this spaceship appears over Johannesburg, South Africa, and the aliens are consequently segregated into District 9, which is essentially the same thing as apartheid. That was the most paper-thin parallelism. The metaphor there was basically having no metaphor. In fact, I thought it remarkable that none of the South Africans in this movie commented gee, Mike, this is awfully similar to that one time when we were segregating black people, eh? And I know my South African sucks, but working on it. And it was really remarkable because it's exactly the same as the apartheid of the blacks in South Africa. And I know that's exactly what the author was going for, because this is almost an autobiographical account of the director and writer's experiences with apartheid in South Africa. And I get that that's exactly the point he's trying to make, but at the same time I think it actually kind of weakens his argument when South Africa, I think, has kind of moved on past that point. you could just replace the word prawns with black people and you have the same thing. It really doesn't take that much of a stretch of the imagination to realize this is exactly what he's talking about. So, in that sense, I thought the symbolism there was about as subtle as a brick to the head. I felt like my intelligence was being a little insulted, to tell you the truth. Like, get it? This is apartheid. Get it? These are black people. We were mean to them. And here's the other thing I know that people are going to say to me, and I understand this, is that I have never personally had any experience with apartheid. I've never dealt with racism, being, your standard white guy. And I think most of this message and most of the emotional impact that this is supposed to have is maybe a little lost on me. And I admit that, and I think that's part of the goodness of this movie, is that it really wants to bring that message to people who otherwise would have no experience with that. The metaphor there is you're supposed to make that connection between the aliens and the people. I get that. But I still thought it was really, really ham-fisted and, again, kind of insulting. My girlfriend was actually kind of saying that this is probably a little insulting, probably more than a little insulting, to the various other nationalities that are portrayed in there. If I were South African, I would feel a little shafted on that score, because it's kind of portraying the South Africans as being hopelessly racist. And I don't know if South Africa has moved on beyond that point. I would like to think they did, but maybe not. I know it was very bad during the apartheid years, definitely. But I also thought this was actually kind of negative towards the Nigerians. I know Nigeria is not exactly a paradise on earth. And I know there's a lot of corruption, a lot of murder, and a lot of warlords going on there. But at the same time, they kind of painted those Nigerians with a pretty broad brush as being these corrupt, basically insane people who are trying to eat the aliens and, in some cases, other people. If I were Nigerian, I think I would feel a little misrepresented here. I don't know. Maybe you guys know more about this than me. Please, educate me on this. I would like to know if that's a real serious problem going on in South Africa, if that's being unfair to South Africans or Nigerians. I think my second problem has to do with, I have to be honest, the directing of this film. If I were making this movie, and I admit I am not and probably would never be tapped to do such a thing because I have very little experience in this thing, but this movie kind of takes the approach of being like half documentary, in the sense that it shows several scenes as if this were actually a real documentary on District 9, as it like interviews with the people involved, the officers, the family of the people involved. And I thought those were very effective. Those were the best parts of the movie. Where I thought it kind of fell apart was when it started shifting away from the documentary focus onto the more action-oriented approach, because the way the story is told, it was impossible to stick with the documentary approach for that long. I mean, you had to kind of step away from that to see the more private moments where this guy is dealing with the aliens, dealing with the problems with his own health, and things like that, especially the action climax. It was very jarring to me, though, that I thought that it kind of shifted from news footage as we were watching the action take place on the ground from a news helicopter, and then going back down to ground level where there could be nobody possibly holding a camera for a documentary and watching these firefights and things like that take place. To me, that was kind of a tonal dissonance, or I don't even know what you call it, but it was actually kind of distracting to me to watch the point of view change so radically so often. I think that if you were going to make a documentary movie, you need to stick with that conceit the whole way through. You need to stick with the documentary feel to it. If you're going to make a movie, make a movie. If you're going to make a documentary, stick with that. Because when you start shifting points of view, I think it kind of seems like cheating, like you didn't write a good enough script to stick with one point of view. I don't know. I think if any of you know that much about screenwriting or screenplay writing, maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to know. But when we were talking about the various plot holes and the things we didn't really believe, it was vital that we believed that these people were being this horrible and cruel to the aliens, and yet at the same time we kind of didn't. Maybe it's our naivete, but we kind of didn't believe that such cruelty could still exist on such a wide scale, especially in a country like a more civilized country. I hate to use that word, civilized, but I know racism exists. But at the same time, you'd think there'd be kind of a sense of wonder and awe at these aliens that doesn't seem to exist. They're regarded as little more than vermin, and maybe I just don't really buy that, and I think that's the failure of the film to not make me believe that these people could be so horrible to these aliens, who are shown as being quite intelligent and shockingly self-sufficient in such a fashion. Now, you could understand hostility in terms of from the government, like being very distrustful of aliens, and you could definitely see some xenophobia occurring. Fear of their technology. Why did they come here? What do they want? Do they know more than they're telling? And again, I think the movie could have been much more successful had they stuck with the documentary approach. And here's how I would have done it. I would have told this story as a documentary from day one of the alien arrival, like news footage, interviews with the military people involved, civilians who were seeing this awesome sight as this spaceship started to arrive, and then progressively going through the years as we start to understand these aliens, and as we started to get more and more exposure to them. And I think a documentary would be ideal for showing that kind of societal descent as the human race kind of fell out of love and kind of stopped feeling awestruck at these aliens and started to regard them as being more verminous and more undesirable. Because I think you'd want to see how people started to realize that these aliens didn't know any kind of universal truths. They didn't really bring any spectacular high technology. They didn't bring any advances in science or medicine. And really, in several senses, they're no better than us. And so I think the documentary failed in that regard to show us kind of falling out of love, or kind of losing that infatuation with aliens. And only very briefly in the movie do we see like pro-alien people who are protesting the racism that at the hands of these South African government officials. In fact, I think it was a disservice to the people who were very open-minded about this. I would have liked to have seen more of the people who are supporting the aliens. Like, why is it so impossible for them to get out of District 9? It seems to me like for every racist there might have been in South Africa and around the world, there are a lot of people who would have been very supportive, would have been welcome to have housed and fed and clothed these aliens. Again, maybe it's my naivete, but I kind of didn't believe that people could be so mean. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of believe that there would be kind people willing to extend humanitarian efforts to these guys, or at least get them out of that hellhole. And that kind of ties into like the genocide in Darfur and my own ignorance at the African condition, because there is a lot of genocide, there is a lot of murder going on in Africa, and I guess the people there are absolutely brutal to otherwise innocent people, and there's a lot of suffering going on in the world, and America kind of turns a blind eye to it. And I guess you could take that enlightenment as a good point at District 9. So, I don't know, I guess it raised a lot more questions than answers. And maybe that's a good thing. I guess if I got that much out of the movie, it can't have failed, right? But I think if I were making this movie, I just would have gone a lot more differently. I would have gone like hardcore documentary approach. But if I'd done that, we wouldn't have gotten the same movie at all. It wouldn't have been nearly as cinematic. It would have been much more dry and maybe analytical, and it probably wouldn't have been nearly as entertaining as it was. And, another thing that really bothered me was the fact that if you watch the trailers, there's a lot of scenes in the trailer that aren't in the movie. Like, there's several scenes where you can see government officials interviewing or interrogating one of the aliens, asking him how his weapons work, like where their ship comes from, where their homeworld is, and the alien's like, we just want to leave. We want to get, we don't want to be here. We'd like to go. And that's not in the movie. And I thought that was kind of a ripoff. Like, again, that was another documentary style scene that would have been great in a pure documentary, but it wasn't there. That's actually an occurrence that I haven't seen all that much. There were a few movies a few years ago, like I remember Highlander Endgame had several scenes that in the trailer that were not in the movie, and that really confused me. I haven't seen that until now, where there were scenes in the trailer that weren't in the movie. But yeah, I know it seems like I'm coming down hard in this movie, and I'm not. I was entertained. I think maybe there were scenes where the violence was a little over the top. Like I lost count of how many times the camera was splattered with gore. But it was an entertaining movie, and it was definitely thought-provoking. I think we've proved by now that this movie definitely can stir some discussion. So please, discuss it. Enlighten me if there's any kind of issues that I'm missing out. If I'm missing the point, please let me know, because I'd like to understand this movie better. And if I'm really being naive, and that's possible, believe me, I'll be the first to admit, my own hypocrisy, my own ignorance. So yeah, enlighten me. Talk about District 9 if you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me that maybe it was a little too brute force with its symbolism there, which, yeah, I kind of thought it did. But yeah, discuss it. I hope you enjoy the movie. I would encourage you to go see this movie. If nothing else, it'll give you something to talk about on the ride home, and that's rare, believe me. And yeah, in terms of summer blockbusters, you could do a lot worse. So I'd recommend it. Go see it, and until then, see you on the message boards. Bye.